Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is Thursday, April 16th. It is about 11 a.m. right now. And shall we start with the Iran war, or shall we push that off to later? Because we do have other topics to talk about.
Yeah, let's do Iran talk later. Let's start with the regulation-related meeting that the Blue House held yesterday. Was it like an inauguration meeting of a new type of task force?
So it was a little confusing. It was supposed to be what the president called smart regulations. He didn't use the word deregulation because that's a conservative keyword. But basically, it does come down to some levels of deregulation. The president was talking. Now, this is not something that came out of the blue. The administration in general has been talking about smart regulations ever since day one. And
What's smart?
Well, that's the big question. They're talking about how they ought to do with regulations that do not work, at keeping regulations that are important, but doing away with those that actually hinder businesses. So in a lot of ways, they did sound like they were talking like conservatives, but they didn't really specify what regulations they were talking about.
Because there are certain code words that the governments use, right? Like smart, it usually means AI, or it's case by case. Like it will depend on certain cases and certain consequences. It seems like the latter, but it's not really clear.
And they're not giving this type of attention to the kinds of regulations that the businesses themselves are talking about. And now, whether it is fair or unfair or boneheaded or not, one of the regulations that the semiconductor industry has been talking about is the hourly maximum that workers are allowed to work. What's the
52.
52 hours, right? Now, the industry themselves and conservative pundits have been saying that this is the kind of regulation that squeezes and forces industries to a political mandate as opposed to allowing them to work or make workers stay in the factories longer.
So that's the waiver issue, right? For the
It is.
semiconductor industry. And if I remember correctly, during the presidential election, did he sidestep this topic? He didn't really touch on this topic all that much at the time, right? Yeah.
No.
During the campaign, he did not talk about anything that was controversial. And now, this is the deregulation that the industries themselves want. But this is the kind of a regulation that the Jamaican administration is not going to touch. They're going to keep that. So what do they really mean by smart regulation? I have no clue.
So it sort of sounds like they want to do away with it to a certain extent, but they don't want to make it sound like they are aligned with PPP on it.
Kind of, sort of, but
Because they kind of need it.
they do. So they're trying to sound like conservatives and progressives at the same time. They're packaging this as smart regulations, but again, there were no specifics. This was all about vibes.
So it's smart vibes so far. So let's keep an eye on it because it's just an inaugural meeting. There were a couple of more labor-related issues this week. It was last week, actually, late last week, the Labor Ministry issued a guideline on implementing 포괄 임금제 금지, which is trying to do away with what used to be there for many companies, where basically they ask workers to sign a contract that includes potential overtime payment average into their base salary so that when they actually do overtime, they don't get paid extra, right?
Because it's already paid in a lump sum initially. Yeah.
Right. And the ministry guideline basically is to ask workers now to start calling out the companies that is still doing this sort of contract. But then it's going to be tricky because there are many companies that already signed the agreement.
And is the government basically telling workers to demand a renegotiation?
I think that's the thing. But then I've looked into the guideline a little bit, and I feel like if I'm a worker who signed it before, I will actually find it really difficult to actually call the companies out because I will face, punitive measures potentially,
And
formally
in
or
this
informally.
economy,
And also, like, can you find other jobs if you don't want to sign that agreement? It's kind of tricky,
in this
right? Yeah,
economy,
exactly. And there were, speaking of economy, fuel prices, etc. Now let's start talking about Iran as well. But start with the Blue House. Kang Won-sik, the chief of staff, he's been very, very busy, and he does deserve some credit for being very busy and somewhat successful as well, right? Where did he visit this
Oh, yeah,
time?
he was quite successful. He went to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Kazakhstan.
In a week?
Yes. So he's visiting all these 4 countries to negotiate and also discuss measures. Emergency energy diplomacy, they called it. And it's been going on since the first week of March, since the outbreak of the conflict and oil spikes and whatsoever. But Kang Won-sik did announce yesterday that the country has secured 273 million barrels of crude oil from these 4 countries, different amounts, of course, from each, and up to 2.1 million tons of naphtha to be rolled into the country by the end of the year.
Right, John, can you give us a 101, like really easy explanation for the newbies, for the dumb sort of version of what this means in reality? Naphtha and oil separately.
okay, so what Kang Won-sik was saying was that they secured up to what would amount to a 3 months worth of supply had this been under normal terms. So this is a key phrase. Last month, they were talking about how they had secured 50 million barrels of oil as opposed to 80, which is what South Korea normally imports under normal circumstances. And so they really emphasize this line. It's not a reduced amount. It's the kind of amount that South Korea would have typically used. So South Korea got 3 months worth of normal supplies. But again, from these different countries that Kang Won-sik visited. But again, this is a piece of paper. It's a contract to prioritize shipments to South Korea and an agreement to ship these amounts of crude oil and naphtha, but we don't know when they will actually arrive. Because, the American president might be saying that there is a truce and the war is over, but the missiles are still flying. The UAE is intercepting dozens of drones and missiles every day.
And mines are still there, and the Iranians cannot find where they are?
The Iranians apparently cannot find the mines that they planted. The Americans have imposed their own blockade after blockade. The Iranians are saying, let's make the world a shitty place. And the Americans are saying, let's make it even shittier. And so that's the situation that we're in right now.
That's a very good explanation for the noobs. And also, you said it's just a piece of paper, but also just diplomatically, why was this a difficult deal that he sort of made a sort of semi-breakthrough compared to other countries?
Well, that's because other countries are going to these same countries to get their crude oil.
Right. What I mean is, like, I saw that there was a MOFA announcement, for instance, that South Korea decided to provide a certain amount of money for the ICRC, the Red Cross, for humanitarian aid for Iran. It seems like there are multiple channels working on doing two things at the same time, trying not to be on the US radar too much while trying to tell the Middle East countries that, we are not, part of the US, whatever.
Sure, it's a whole give and take sort of thing. But Juna, did Kang Won-sik say anything about South Korea promising Cheongung-2 missiles to the Gulf states?
Well, that's what he's been sort of skipping over.
That's interesting.
He's suggested that, a reporter asked him just yesterday whether there was a defense deal quid pro quo with the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia.
Which will be very controversial at this point, right?
Indeed. And he mentioned in these exact words saying that it was inappropriate and it was not right for the South Koreans to look for deals like that.
He say that?
Yes.
Or not? So he wasn't like it's inappropriate to answer. But
no, he said it was inappropriate to link the two together.
I see.
So was it a denial?
Take it as you will.
It wasn't clear.
Yeah, it wasn't clear. But of course, he has alluded to the fact that I think it was March 6th and March 17th when he made the trips, or before and after he made the trips to the UAE on the first round, where he did also receive quite a significant number of barrels from that state, from Abu Dhabi. He did say that there was requests from Middle East nations, not just the UAE, for cooperation on South Korean air defense assets, like the Cheongung-2. He did not mention the Cheongung-2 in its name, but he did say missile defense systems.
This is very interesting because I think maybe 1.5 years during Yoon administration, towards the end of Yoon administration, I remember three of us talking about all the K defense boom and all the exports, missile defense and other asset exports to Middle East. And at the time, we were saying, well, this is great for South Korean economy, but they are not really we don't really have any precedent thinking about potential end use of that. And what if there is a crisis in Middle East and we end it like that? In that conversation, we had no idea this will actually happen at the time.
One thing also to add is that the South Korean defense industry authorities and also the defense industry as a whole, its understanding of the Middle East market and its the political incentives and also the political derogatory terms that follow it are not as well educated as per se you would look at Europe or Central Asia or even Southeast Asia. So that's why I think a lot of government authorities and also a lot of defense industry authorities are quite very hushed, shall we say, on the potential Middle East deals that we could see in terms of Cheonggung 2.
But most of the
and
most of the Middle East related defense investments and exports, they were like already signed like way before,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so these were signed in 2022, 2024.
Mm.
And this is just, there was a report on April 12th, I believe, from the Wall Street Journal. They were citing sources familiar with the matter, saying that the Saudis and also the Abu Dhabi had requested South Korean companies like LIG Defense and Aerospace and also Hanwha Systems to provide these systems much more in advance on their expected times of delivery. That's vis-a-vis the amount of strikes that they are facing from Iranian drones and missiles at this current moment in time as well. But of course, there's also a backlog within the South Korean defense industry where they have to deliver for their own KAMD services, South Korea's own missile shield.
Korea Air and Missile Defense.
Which is still facing a lot of delays, especially as we saw in 2022, in 2019, we saw K2 tanks having a delay of delivery because they were being sent to Poland. We saw late delivery of the FA-50s because they were being sent to the Philippines. You know, this is not without historical precedent.
Yeah.
That's why there is still a bit of concern based on how these Cheonggung 2 air defense missiles will be delivered to the South Korean military, as well as... So these are basically the same factory working on two very different deals.
I see.
So they're just bottlenecks everywhere.
Right.
South Korea has been able to deliver planes, tanks, and howitzers quickly, but even South Korea can't perform miracles. And especially with all of these...
No miracle of Hangang anymore, Sean?
There is no more miracles.
But there's still Hangang.
There is no more hangang. There's no more water. There's no more nothing. It's all gone. Bottlenecks everywhere. Bromine, which is a key critical input for microchips that go into these missiles, are all under missile range, which come from Israel, whom President Lee Jae-myung pissed off with a mean tweet. Who is planning any of this?
Nobody. Speaking of planning or not planning, there might be a couple more stuff that the U.S. is thinking about planning, including an exclusive from USA Today. So grain of salt, it's not confirmed yet. Pentagon ramps up planning for possible military operations in Cuba. So what does this mean to South Korea and other allies?
Well, what this means is that Marco Rubio and Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are drunk, and they should, sober up, go to AA, and stop drinking.
I don't think they drink.
And, okay, you know what my mother used to tell me? If I wanted to have dessert, I first needed to finish my vegetables.
That's true.
They caused this mess in Iran, and now they're thinking about, without finishing this, having another military campaign in Cuba.
So this is just a report for now.
Just a reminder, it's a report.
It's just reportedly for now, but it is true. If this is true, they are trying to basically eat broccoli with cake, right?
I hate everything.
That's disgusting.
That is disgusting, and also will have a massive impact on whatever alliance coordinations needed for that or not.
They even have missiles left to fire on Cuba. They have donkeys dragging artillery pieces from the 50s on a good day. Why are they striking Cuba? They don't have oil?
Week ahead, any military or defense related topics next week?
Yeah, so the US Rock Freedom Edge drills, the air drills, will be continuing to go on until Friday next week.
Remind us what it is.
Yeah, so it's a biannual large-scale air interdiction drills that go on between the two countries and the two countries' air forces, and they are usually combating North Korean missile and nuclear launches.
So not Cuba.
Not Cuba.
No,
Okay.
No.
Okay, it's pretty far away as well. But remind me what happened after all the talk about reinstating the spirit of the comprehensive military agreement buffer zone with North Korea, the air buffer zone as well. Like, are these drills anywhere near the border or is it like super far away?
No, so they're being held, I believe it was in Gwangju Air Base.
Pretty far away.
Yes.
Yeah.
So quite on the southeastern side of the peninsula. So that's nowhere near the border.
Right. And there are a couple confirmation hearings going on. What's the most important one?
The BOK incoming governor, Shin Yun-sung, his nomination hearing was actually yesterday, that is Wednesday, but it fell through because of political squabbles between the Democratic and the People Power parties.
Like education stuff and private asset stuff, right?
About family members holding foreign nationalities, about the BOK incoming governor having foreign assets. So it wasn't anything about his monetary policy views. It was about domestic
Or
politics.
usual stuff, right? But just very, very briefly, what kind of person is he?
He was, I don't think he headed, but he was at the BIS. And so he's a trained economist. And so the Democratic Party is really emphasizing the fact that he is a trained macroeconomist who would be able to steer the South Korean economy. That being said, we're not exactly quite sure where he stands on the valuation of the Korean won, whether he's comfortable with it going beyond 1,500 or whatever. There have been some mixed signals coming from Shin Yun-sung.
Right. Also, it's moot point. Like even when you had like personal views in the past for like BOK governors, they tend to follow the government policy lines usually in South Korea.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. No, maybe, yes.
I mean, like Ri Chang-yong wasn't like that though at first. Now that I think of it,
There were differences between... Now, Lee Chang-yong and the Yoon administration had similar views because the Yoon administration was all about fiscal tightening, and Lee Chang-yong was also about having a very cautious monetary policy. But that script flipped when Lee Jae-myung came in.
right? But also during Yoon administration, I remember Ri Chang-yong kind of disagreed about the whole social security related aspects. I think Ri Chang-yong was like way much more progressive compared to the Yoon administration at the time.
That is also true. So there are differences. Yes, the BOK and the government do try to work hand in hand for the overall economic health, but because they have very different incentives, fiscal policies are being driven by immediate political demands and monetary policies being driven by concerns about inflation, for example, they don't always align on the day-to-day operations.
That's true. And speaking of confirmation hearing, this is probably not week ahead, but weeks ahead, there was a major nomination in the US as well.
Right. So the White House announced, I think it was at the start of this week, Michelle Steele, the former Republican congresswoman from California.
Not Gordon Chang.
No, would be the next U.S. ambassador nominee for the Trump administration to South Korea. She is very
Orange County person,
yeah, she
right?
is an Orange County person, and she's also very good friends with the current Republican congresswoman representing California as well, Ms. Young Kim. But at the same time, she's also been heading and being part of committees that were very anti-CCP, also pro-North Korea human rights, but also at the same time very much in support of the U.S. ROC alliance.
Right. And it seems like there's not much track record of her talking about FTAs or trade econ related stuff,
Right.
tariff related stuff,
But
but like
the-
just China in general.
Yeah. And Xavier T. Brunson, the current USFK commander, he will be showing up at the Senate Armed Services Committee to field lawmakers' questions, mostly answering questions probably about the redeployment of Patriot or reported redeployment of Patriot or THAAD missile systems to the Middle East, as also USFK's readiness against North Koreans.
And what might also come up is like OPCON related stuff, maybe
Right,
because South
yeah.
Korea reportedly, they didn't announce it yet, but they internally decided, it seems, that the OPCON transfer will be aimed at 2028. Right.
So they're looking to complete the basic assessments for field training assessments. I think it was by
FOC, you mean?
Yeah, FOC
By this year.
by this year, and then further assessments by 2027, and then finalize the full stamping of the OPCON transfer deal by 2028.
So we have to keep an eye on the next security consultative meeting, I guess.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inbox by Monday at 2 p.m. by the Week Ahead newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, subscribe. Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Career Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Career Pro Podcast.